some of my viewpoints and forecasts have been quite different in some cases than the silver gurus, and the bottom line is I don't really believe so much in what they say. And I'm beginning to believe a lot less on what they used to point out compared to several months ago. I used to believe some, now I'm beginning to believe a lot less. And I'm beginning to think that there's a very good chance that the precious metals market is not going to look pretty in the next 1 or 2 years. In fact, according to my research, it's not going to look very bullish several years from now. And you think, well, how could that be the case? I mean, there's so much debt and a lot of currency devaluation. Well, first of all, do these elements actually create a shock in precious metals prices? So when you think about it, with all this debt, do we really have to have increases in precious metals prices? Some might argue, okay, there can be like a form of default, austerity, and also is there really currency devaluation? That's another thing that you have to understand. So what I want to look into, what I want to tell you is please think outside the box. And don't let these people, these gurus, to really help you or rescue you. Listen to them, but don't hear the way they want you to hear them. There's kind of a distinguishing pattern that you have to understand. But as far as I know, I'm beginning to think that a lot of this debt and so-called QE isn't necessarily contributing to high cost of living. And if you don't believe me, you can look at oil. You can look at a lot of food commodities, because they haven't been going up relatively 12 months ago. There's been all of this dollars being pumped in. Look, the way I see it, this is really just a secret bailout for the banks. And some may argue it goes all around the world, especially Europe. So when you think about it, these newly dollars or currencies, the way I see it, they're not being put out in the real world to the common person like me or you. It's just being hoarded. And when it's being hoarded, how can you really see high cost of living? Well, all I can tell you, it's just that you have to understand that I think largely the silver bull run was in some cases speculative. Fears about the overall society as a whole, you can really call it speculative. I believe largely commodity prices are spiking due to speculation. Of course, there was a new policy that was enacted in 2000, and we've seen a lot of commodity spikes and dumps since then. And really, a lot of this was just, I feel, as a pump and dump scheme, and really pushed by salesperson, which I will expose later in my videos. But what I want to tell you something is, there are going to be eventually opportunities in precious metals, but don't really buy into what they tell you. And when I'm looking at these charts, and I've even mentioned this like last Christmas or something, I just don't feel as bullish as I used to. 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago, 3 years ago. Really think outside the box. Now let me show you some charts that I really want to deliver later on, and we're going to look at best case and worst case scenarios. And as far as I can tell you, yes, there are some bullish opportunities possible for the silver markets, but I'm not looking as bullish as a lot of the silver gurus keep telling you, as far as I know. Let's just look at the long term first of all. Bullish case scenario, okay? We continue this long-term trend line. We've touched it once, twice, third time, fourth, and fifth. So is there a possibility to around $40-ish range? Who knows? Now, we did really have a major dip. I have a feeling that we can touch $26 and maybe even $30 here, so that way the silver gurus can use that as an opportunity to think, ooh, the silver market is back, and this really was an unnecessary correction, and we're finally going to see this thing take off. Of course, when things usually dip, they usually rebound, so who knows? maybe this can be considered as a sucker's rally. Looking right here, we have a kind of a support resistance level at 2029. So we've touched it here. We've touched it here many times. This was around Bear Stearns of March 2008. We can touch it several times and then take off, or we might touch it several times and plunge below. Now, what are the possible support lines? You got 1607, which we touched several times in 2010 and in 2008 as well. We have this long-term support line that is sending upward. Of course, some may argue this can be the worst-case scenario, and people can argue, well, maybe silver is not going to be so bullish, but at least the US dollar has been devalued so much, at least we got to be in an upward trend. So this just to show you where we are, $4, $8, and this is right around $12.80 or $13, and that is a possibility that we can touch that. As a matter of fact, when you look at it in a linear format, $4 in 2003, $8 range in 2008, and $13 in 2013. Of course, in a logarithmic form, it can be $16 in 2013 because you keep doubling every 5 years. Now, what if we are really not in a bull market? What if we're going to be in a bear market and we may stay that way for at least 25 to 30 years, or maybe just 10 years, 20 years? Where can we go? How terrible is this going to be? Well, we can touch $8. I don't think we'll ever get low as $4. I mean, come on. The US dollar has certainly devalued since then a lot. Of course, every time a silver bull market is over, we don't touch the beginning territory. We didn't go back to $1 in the 1970s. We ended up 3 times the amount, and 3 times the amount is around $12, $13. But who knows? Some might argue that we certainly might have more supply. We can argue that maybe there was just too much speculation, so we might hit $8. But I'm really thinking that there is a possibility that it could touch around $12, $13. But like I mentioned before, physical and paper price are quite different. Now, are the premiums getting larger? I'm not exactly sure. Now, I don't really like to buy this idea. I really feel that to some cases this was kind of a pump and dump scheme. And I don't really see it as really as a good inflation hedge. I mean, yes, in some cases, I mean, it has increased your purchasing power for the last 10 years, last 40 years, but I don't really find it as reliable. So you really have to look into that. The bottom line is, I can tell you something, that as far as quantitative easing, I can tell you that possibly I'm thinking that it might have been bullish for silver as well as a situation for high cost of living in the beginning. You can argue that the other tries are probably not as deadly or devastating. Of course, some similar situation is happening in Japan, but maybe if they try it again, it's not going to be as terrible as it used to be. So this is another thing you have to consider. And as far as I can tell you, a lot of these statements are making are quite distinguishable from what I used to tell you last year or a couple years ago. I apologize if what I've been telling you hasn't been so reliable. At least I apologize, okay? I'm not like a lot of these other gurus that just makes a bunch of predictions and just hides and disappears or continues to parrot the same exact thing. I don't do that for your information. And people tell me, well, what about the fact that it's undervalued? It costs less than it was in 1980. Well, who knows? Maybe there's a possibility that silver has a lot more supply than it was in 1980. Have you ever considered that? I mean, how do you exactly know that it's a lot less in quantity and far more in demand than it was in 1980. You got to understand, maybe there's a lot of sellers out there. People, you guys need to wake up. Now, as far as I can tell you, I will give you more updates ahead, and I'll also give you more updates about other commodities, gold, oil, as well as Dow Jones, a lot of other equities I'm interested in, bond markets, real estate, and the list goes on. Thank you so much, and please stay tuned.